Oh, my love is like a red rose that's newly sprung in June.
मेरा महबूब बेमिसले सुर्ख सुर्ख गुलाब माह जून जो खिलकर हुआ शादाब.
My love is like a red rose that's newly sprung in June. My love is like a melody so sweetly played in tune.
He has been voted Scotland's Greatest Scot time and time again in public vote. He is an icon of Scotland and of the Scottish people. He has a national day named after him on the 25th of January each year. Let's meet Scotland's national poet, Robert Burns. Hi there, welcome to another episode of Scotistani. I have Chris Waddle with me, who is the learning manager at the Burns Cottage Museum, is that correct?
The Robert Burns Birthplace Museum, but
yeah.
This is Burns Cottage, this is the birthplace of the bird.
Thank you. And can you just say a little bit about it, please? Can you tell us a wee bit?
Yeah, sure. Well, the cottage was built in about 1757 by Burns' father, William Burnes. And Burns was born here on the 25th of January 1759, which is why every 25th of January in Scotland and indeed around the world, people sit down and they celebrate, they have a Burns supper. So it's coming together, it's eating, it's drinking, it's reciting poetry, and it's generally having a good time. So it's something that I think we Scots are pretty good at, you know. So Burns, the first Burns supper was actually held in the cottage in 1801, so that was only 5 years after he died.
Wow, okay.
So we've been celebrating Burns annually since 1801, you know, so he really is a big deal to the Scots, and I think to people around the world, people cleave to Burns. There's funny wee nodes of places where people really stick to him, so Canada and America, South Africa, and Australia, they're obvious because that's where the Scots diaspora went.
So the other question is, obviously you're talking about the Burns supper, and obviously haggis is very popular here.
Yeah.
What can you just tell everybody what haggis actually is?
Haggis, it's the offal of a sheep, what we'd call the pluck, so it's the heart and the lungs, which is then minced up, it's mixed with oatmeal, it's spiced, and then it's traditionally cooked inside a sheep's stomach, so the stomach is packed and then it's boiled.
Okay.
So what I would say about haggis is it's absolutely delicious. Just try not to think about it, okay? It was famously quoted on The Simpsons, you know, Burns, Scottish culture gets everywhere. And groundskeeper Willie was selling it at a stall and he described it that way, you know, sheep's offal and oatmeal cooked in a sheep's stomach tastes as good as it sounds, you know, so it actually tastes better than it sounds, I have to say.
And I guess the other bit of, shall we say, a wee bit of gossip for us, which is not really gossip, but I hear that Prince Charles and Camilla were here yesterday.
It was the day before yesterday, yeah. So I mean, that's one of the things about the cottage. One of the things that we like to sort of boast about it is it's had numerous very famous visitors in the years that it's operated as a sort of a pilgrimage site for people with literary and other interests. So Charles and Camilla were here, the Queen's been here, President Eisenhower has dropped in here, President Ulysses S. Grant has dropped in here, the widow of Abraham Lincoln has dropped in here. My personal favourite, Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, dropped in here in 1965. We've got a wonderful picture down in the museum,
wow. Okay.
him surrounded by local kids. Other literary people as well. Keats has been here, Wordsworth has been here, all paying homage to their great, the great romantic writer who inspired them.
And I guess that's what Robert Burns was famous for, was the romanticism that he brought, the whole kind of that ideology of romanticism that basically took over the world, and as you say, that inspired so many people.
Indeed, he's the sort of a morning star of the Romantic movement very early. He's a sort of a literary bridge between neoclassicism and the Romantic movement, you know, so he's reading guys like Pope, and then he writes, and then he ultimately influences your Wordsworths and your Keats and people like that. And of course, a lot of these guys were quite radical thinkers, as was Burns. You know, some of the poetry that he wrote clearly showed his struggle from his humble roots. And a lot of people wonder about the political worth of Burns, but I would say this, a man's a man for all that. that man to man the world ours shall brothers be for all that. That's a great mantra for the sort of paranoid modern world that we live in. You know, if we can remember those words and do that most Burnsian thing, stick out a hand in friendship to shake hands, as we do at every Burn supper, as we do at every hug Manet. That's a great message for the world, surely.
Absolutely. Can I just ask you, what's your favourite poem?
My favourite poem? Gosh, there's dozens and dozens. It's a bit of a funny one. I think it's a bit of a cop-out here. My favourite's Tamilshanter.
That's my favourite one too. I love that.
You've even come with a hat and everything today,
Rosal.
That's brilliant. But it's my favourite poem in its entirety, but my favourite piece of Burns is actually the opening stanza to the Holy Fair. And the Holy Fair is one of Burns' polemics. It's an attack on the Kirk, the Church of Scotland. Burns and the Kirk locked horns, mainly because of some of his extracurricular activities. It has to be said he was notorious with the girls, and that's part of the mythology that's quite true. But the Holy Fair is, in many ways, it's an attack on the Kirk, but the first stanza is the most beautiful piece of nature poetry, and it's delivered in a Scots tongue. So it's upon a summer Sunday's morn when nature's face is fair. I walk it forth to view the corn and snuff the caller air. The rising sun o'er Goston Muir with glorious licht was glinting. The hares were hirpling down the firs, the lavrocks they were chanting. Fou sweet that day. So absolutely, it's fantastic.
Chris, can you tell me a little bit about what this room was used for and just a wee bit about the rooms as well?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the kitchen. But in many ways it was more than just a kitchen. It's a living room and it's a bedroom as well. You'll see the box bed in the corner there, and you can see the wee christening gowns to indicate the 4 children that were born here, so Burns and 3 of his siblings. So you can just imagine father sitting there in his chair, William, Agnes, mother, sitting there. That's actually a nursing chair.
Okay.
And she would cook at the fire. William would sit there, he would open the big hall Bible of an evening and read passages to the family. You know, it's 18th century Presbyterian Scotland, very strict, very religious. And this is one of 4 rooms that goes through into the spence, and these were the original 2 rooms built in 1757, and then after the Burns family had left, somewhere between 1780 and 1800, the byre and the barn were added at the far end to extend it into the 4-room cottage as it exists today.
Okay.
One of the things I tell children when we bring them in here is, you know, you're not just walking on the floor, you're walking in the footsteps of real history here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Scotland's most famous native son was born in this room, you know, 25th January 1759, he comes kicking and screaming into the world there. And now he's the face that adorns a million shortbread tins, but he's so much more than that.
Do you think he was actually born here, this space here?
Yes, absolutely. That's where the bed, parts of it, timbers and whatnot have been replaced over the centuries, but it was definitely there, and that's exactly where he was born.
But was this humble for that time, for that age?
Yeah, it would have been considered sort of working class. They weren't living in absolute grinding poverty, but they would have had to have make ends meet quite a lot. The thrift for which we Scots are either rightly or wrongly sort of famed kind of emerges over the centuries. Scotland was, until comparatively recently, quite a poor country. Hopefully that's not going to be the case in the future. But he enters the world into a very humble, very ordinary life. You know, his parents were tenant farmers. They didn't own land, they couldn't vote, they had no right to vote because they weren't landowners, and that's quite interesting. So Burns throughout his life couldn't vote, and yet he's hugely politicised.
What kind of things are they growing here? This is a curly something?
Yeah, curly kale. So this is a traditional Scots kale yard. So whilst they would have farmed the land around here, they'd grow what they needed for, in terms of vegetables here, and to a degree they were largely self-sufficient. These are all traditional things.
Chris, tell us why people, say from the South Asian background, should take a membership of the National Trust for Scotland.
Well, it's beneficial to them. We have loads and loads of sites. You pay your membership, you can get into those sites for free. It's a great day out for the family. Look at what we've got here, you can replicate that across Scotland. But you also help us in our work. You help us maintain and preserve these wonderful buildings for posterity, and you help curators and learning staff to teach people about Scotland's culture. And it means that we can throw open our doors and welcome people from Scotland and from across the globe.
Yes, and indeed, why not? Because I think that's what you've been saying all along during our wee journey here, that, you know, the thing about Robert Burns is that's what he symbolises now, that you export him out and so many people from all over the world come as well to see.
I always say this about Burns in terms of his global reach. He's got the most Scottish accent, but the most universal message.
ग़ज़ाला आज रॉबर्ट बर्न्स के म्यूज़ियम आके मुझे अपनी टीन एज याद आ गई, स्कूल टाइम्स जब इंग्लिश का जो हमारा सब्जेक्ट था उसमें हम पोइट्री पढ़ते थे तो उसमें बहुत सारे इंग्लिश पोइट्स थे, लाइक विलियम वर्ड्सवर्थ, विलियम ब्लेक एंड सम अमेरिकन पोइट्स, लेकिन एक स्कॉटिश पोइट था और वो थे रॉबर्ट बर्न्स. एंड आई स्टिल रिमेंबर आई वाज इन क्लास, लाइक जैसे स्कॉटलैंड में हायर्स होते हैं ना आपके, इस तरह जो पाकिस्तान में फर्स्ट ईयर सेकंड ईयर होती है. और रॉबर्ट बर्न्स की पता है कौन सी पोइम थी हमारे कोर्स में? माई लव इज़ लाइक अ रेड रेड रोज. तो तब भी मुझे बहुत अच्छी लगी थी बिकॉज ऑफ इट्स म्यूजिकलिटी. छोटे छोटे वर्ड्स हैं और ईजी टू अंडरस्टैंड. मुझे ये पता चला कि एक स्कॉटिश पाकिस्तानी हैं डॉक्टर हसन बेग, उन्होंने रॉबर्ट बर्न्स की इस पोइम को उर्दू में ट्रांसलेट किया है. तो मैंने सोचा आज अच्छा होगा कि आप इंग्लिश में इस पोइम को रिसाइट करें और मैं उर्दू में करूं, और हमारे लिसनर्स hopefully they will like it as well, like you and I.
Anila, that's a really good idea. Should we go do it?
Yes, let's go.
Oh, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love is like a melody that's sweetly played in tune.
मेरा महबूब बेमिसले सुर्ख सुर्ख गुलाब, माह जून जो खिलकर हुआ शादाब. वो है मौसीकी की एक धुन, जिसने ली दीपक तान की गुन.
As fair art thou, my bonny lass, so deep in love am I, and I will love thee still, my dear, till all the seas gang dry.
मेरा महबूब रोशन खुशनुमा सी गुड़िया, जो मेरे लिए है मोहब्बत की एक पुड़िया. मेरी मोहब्बत रहेगी कायम, समंदर के खुश्क होने तक ये दायम.
Till all the seas gang dry, my dear, and the rocks melt with the sun. Oh, I will love thee still, my dear, while the sands of life shall run.
जब तक सूख न जाए समंदर का ये पानी, और पत्थर भी गर्मी से पिघल न जाएं ए जानी. कायम इस वक्त तक ये मेरी बंदगी, जब तक खत्म न हो इन रेज़ों की ज़िंदगी.
And fare thee weal, my only love, and fare thee weal a while, and I will come again, my love, though it were 10,000 mile.
अब मुझे इजाज़त दे ए मेरे महबूब, कुछ दिन की जुदाई ए मेरे मरहूब. ए जाने मन में लौट आऊँगा, चाहे अपने को 10,000 मील दूर भी पाऊँगा.
This has been created on Leonardo da Vinci's depiction of the Last Supper. Interestingly, Burns has been placed right in the middle with, as you can see, like almost like a halo on top of him. And I think one of the things that people heard him say was that he said that I'll be respected more 100 years after I'm dead than I am now. And when he died, he had little to show for his fame. But after his death, immediately within 3-4 years, almost, his fame grew to global proportions. People like Muhammad Ali came to visit the Burns cottage and where he was born. I love the way this museum has preserved Robert Burns' writing, which is something that's so personal to an artist. One of the things that I learnt was that Robert Burns was famous whilst he was alive. He was well known, certainly, but within 3-4 years of him dying, people were having Burns suppers. And that was set up as a tradition after that. Lots of people that met Robert Burns actually said that he had these amazing eyes that just glowed, literally glowed. And that was it was one of the things that people would first notice about him. Kirk, or the church behind me, is a part of Ayrshire that Robert Burns wrote about. He must have been inspired by this particular kirk and this grave, the cemetery here as well. And his poem, I don't know if any of you read it, but it's called Tamilshanter, has been inspired by this particular building behind me. The story goes that this man was coming back and he was a little bit drunk and he hears all this loud music coming from this building. So he walks up the steps and he's got his horse with him as well. So he looks inside and he sees all the devils and all the witches and everybody just dancing and singing and playing instruments, and they're having this party. And he gets so interested and so absorbed into this that in the middle of it all, or towards the end, he says, "Well done, Cottage." And they all look at him and they think, there's no way that we're going to let him go after him seeing us doing what we were doing. So he realizes this, so he jumps in his horse Meg and he tries to run away, and they're all after him. The witches are all after him, flying in the air. And he's going and he knows he has to get over the bridge so he can cross the water, because the whole idea is that the witches and the devils can't cross the water. They have to stop, they just can't do it. So just as he's about to make it, one of the witches grabs the poor horse's tail and holds on to the tail. And unfortunately, the poor horse's tail, Meg's tail, comes off. So the idea is that he makes it, the horse gets through, but unfortunately the horse is tailless. But I love this poem, I think it's a brilliant story. I just want to point out that this is Robert Burns' father's grave, and Robert Burns is actually written in the back of the grave, the stone. Also, some of his other family members are buried here as well. This monument behind me was erected in 1814 initially in the memory of Robert Burns, the Bard of Scotland. People here love Robert Burns and he is one of the heroes of Scotland. Behind me is the Brig of Doon, and this is the bridge that Robert Burns wrote about in Tamilshanter. And as you can see, there's an absolutely beautiful view behind me, beautiful walks here, lovely cafes, restaurants, and I really do encourage you to come to Scotland and visit this place because it truly is beautiful. Just want to say a big thank you to the National Trust for Scotland for being such wonderful hosts here today in Ayr, where we've managed to see so much and learn so much about Robert Burns. If you liked our film, please do subscribe to Scotistani and do like, share and comment.